The sun was hanging low when Cassian Blackwell reached the edge of Sable Creek. The light was sharp and flat, the color of heated iron. The town sat quiet except for a few horses tied along the main street and the slow flapping of laundry on a sagging clothesline. Cassian's horse, a tired roan with ribs showing through its hide, stumbled a little as it walked, and Cassian leaned forward slightly to steady it. He wasn't injured, but the last 6 days had worn at him. Chasing riders. Being chased. Sleeping on hard ground. He felt it in his back and in the heavy way he breathed. He kept his hat low to block the last glare of sunlight. He didn't look like a man hiding. He looked like a man who had already decided that running any further was not worth the effort. Still, his eyes were alert. Every sound was accounted for. A hammer clinked against metal from the blacksmith's shop. A pair of children murmured behind a fence. A dog scratched itself and then went still when it noticed him. People didn't stare long. They looked just enough to recognize the type. A man who had seen more violence than words. Cassian slowed the horse near the Sable Creek saloon and finally dismounted. His boots hit the ground hard like his body wanted to keep moving, but the dirt held him still. He looped the reins loosely on the rail and walked inside. Inside the saloon. The air was cooler inside and thick with smoke. Lanterns hung low, giving the room a dull gold haze. A few men played cards at a back table, their eyes flicking up for half a second. The piano sat quiet, its lid open but strings still. Cassian didn't move like someone wanting attention. He picked the empty stool farthest from the door and set his hat on the bar. His hands were steady. His breathing was steady. But underneath all of that was the simple, unspoken truth. He was tired. Not weak. Not shaken. Just tired in a way that sits deep. Behind the bar, Ayla Redbird wiped dust off a whiskey bottle and set it back in place. She didn't rush or force any expression when she turned to him. She looked at him the same way she looked at everything, direct, careful, unflinching. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands hanging near her cheek. Her blouse sleeves were rolled to the elbow. Her hands moved efficiently, like she had learned long ago that unnecessary motion only drew attention. "Water or whiskey?" she asked. Her voice was soft but not timid. Cassian took a slow breath before answering, as if deciding whether today needed clarity or numbness. "Water first." Ayla nodded and poured a cup from a clay jug. She didn't ask questions. She didn't act impressed or afraid. That struck him. Most people reacted to him one way or another. She didn't. When he lifted the cup, their eyes locked just briefly, long enough for both to recognize that something in the room had shifted. Sheriff Dalton Reed's observation. At a corner table, Sheriff Dalton Reed leaned back in his chair. He looked clean for a frontier lawman, polished boots, pressed shirt, badge shining. He watched Cassian and Ayla, not openly, but with the kind of gaze a man used when trying to understand a threat without admitting he was threatened. Reed had seen tough men come through town. Men running from bounties, grudges, wars. But something about Cassian's calm bothered him. A man who bragged about violence was predictable. A man who carried it quietly was not. Reed tapped the table. No one responded. He stood and walked toward the bar. Ayla noticed him approach, though she kept her expression even. Her shoulders straightened slightly. Cassian caught that too. "You're new here," Reed said to Cassian, voice casual but with an edge under it. Cassian didn't turn. He drank the last of the water and set the cup down gently. "Just passing through." "Most men passing through don't come in this quiet," Reed replied. Cassian finally looked at him. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "I'm not here to make noise." The two men stood still without moving closer. The air between them tightened. No one else in the room spoke. Ayla's jaw tensed, but she stayed behind the bar. Reed gave a quick, forced smile he didn't mean. "See that it stays that way." He walked back to his table, but he didn't stop watching. Cassian's private thought. Cassian let out a quiet breath. Not nervous, calculating. He hadn't come here to start anything. He had hoped for one night of silence, food, and rest. But rest didn't come easily in a town with a sheriff who watched like that. He felt Ayla's presence before she stepped closer. She set down another cup of water, this time wordlessly. He looked up at her and saw the smallest shift in her expression. Not fear. Recognition. She could tell he was running from something, not by the way he spoke but by the weight he carried in his shoulders. And Cassian could tell she knew something about running too. Ayla walked away before either of them said anything more. But the connection was already made. A quiet understanding neither of them had asked for, and neither of them quite knew what to do with. The woman the riders had taken was named Lila. She had been standing outside the trading post when the fight started, just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cassian didn't know how or why they grabbed her, but the moment he saw the way they handled her, he understood something clearly. They weren't planning on letting her go. They headed north toward the open desert where the land spread wide and empty. Cassian followed from a distance, letting his horse stay at a slow trot. If he pushed too close, they'd notice. If he waited too long, they'd disappear. The air was dry, the sun low enough to throw long shadows. Cassian felt sweat running down his back under his coat, but he didn't take his eyes off the trail. He kept thinking about the expression on Lila's face, confused, scared, but trying hard not to fall apart. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just kept looking around like she was trying to understand what was happening. She's trying to stay alert, he thought. She's smart. That gave him more reason to move quickly. The men finally stopped at a canyon cut into the plain, a narrow slice of stone, deep and hidden from the road. Cassian dismounted behind a cluster of rock outcrops and tied his horse low so it wouldn't silhouette against the sky. He moved in on foot, boots silent on the sand. Inside the canyon the sound changed. Voices echoed off the stone. "Keep her hands tied," one of the men said. "We'll figure out what she's worth in town." "This one looks like she's worth more than coin," another laughed. Cassian stopped. His jaw tightened. His breathing slowed. He wasn't a man known for losing control, but he knew exactly what those words meant. Lila was sitting on the ground, hands bound in front of her. Dust clung to her dress. Her hair was loose, falling across her face. She was trying to keep her expression neutral, but the fear was visible in her shoulders. The men circled around her, carelessly confident. Cassian counted them. 4. One near the entrance. One collecting firewood. 2 closest to Lila. He had a rifle. He had a revolver. He had a knife. But he only had one chance before it turned loud. He watched the guard at the canyon entrance. The man was bored, half slouching, arms crossed, looking at the sky instead of the path. Cassian moved. He didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward the man, silent, each step controlled. When the guard turned his head to look back into camp, Cassian was already close. One hand clamped over the guard's mouth. The knife slid under the ribs. The man tensed, jerked once, then went still. Cassian eased the body down into the sand. His heart was steady, not fast, not slow, just focused. Then the one gathering would turned and saw him. "Hey!" Cassian fired before the man finished speaking. The crack of the revolver echoed hard. The canyon filled with sound. The last 2 men scrambled for their rifles. Lila dropped sideways and curled tight to protect herself. Cassian moved behind a boulder as bullets hit stone and sprayed chips across his coat. He leaned out, fired twice. One shot hit a shoulder, dropping the man. The other missed. The last bandit ran toward Lila, grabbing her by the arm, using her as cover. "Drop it or I'll cut her throat." Cassian froze where he was. His gun was still raised. Lila's breathing was fast. He could see her chest moving sharply. The man's hand was shaking. He wasn't as sure as he wanted to sound. Cassian stepped out slowly, lowering the gun just an inch. "Let her go," he said. His voice was calm, steady. "This doesn't end the way you think." The man swallowed hard. His grip tightened on Lila's arm. She winced. Cassian saw it then, the hesitation. The fear. The man wasn't ready to kill. He was using the threat to survive. Cassian moved. One step to the side. A quick raise of his gun. One shot. The bullet hit the man in the sternum. He collapsed backward. Lila fell free and sat on the ground, breathing hard. Cassian didn't speak right away. He scanned the canyon, made sure no one else was alive. The only sounds were wind and dust. He walked to Lila, slow and careful so he didn't startle her. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, but he could see her hands trembling hard. He took a small knife from his belt and cut the rope binding her wrists. Her skin underneath was red and raw. She looked at him for the first time, really looked. "You followed them alone?" she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Why?" Cassian didn't answer immediately. He didn't have a rehearsed reason. He didn't even fully understand it himself. He just said quietly, "Because someone needed to." Lila exhaled, shaky but controlled. She nodded once, like that answer made sense to her. Cassian helped her stand. There was still a long way back, and the sun was going down. The canyon grew darker as the sun began to fall behind the rock walls. The long shadows made every shape look uncertain. Cassian led Lila toward his horse. She walked slowly, careful with her steps, still catching her breath after everything that happened. She didn't say much at first. She kept pushing strands of hair back from her face, but they fell forward again each time the wind changed. Cassian noticed her hands shaking whenever she tried to adjust her dress or straighten her posture. The adrenaline was wearing off. "You should drink," he said, handing her his canteen. She took it without looking at him. Her lips were dry. She drank carefully, like she was trying not to waste even a drop. When she handed it back, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Cassian just nodded and secured the canteen back to his saddle. They mounted. Lila sat behind him, holding on lightly at first, then more firmly once the horse started moving. Cassian could feel her breathing. Quick, uneven. She was trying to control it. As they rode out of the canyon and onto the open plain, the silence stretched. The land was wide, empty, and painted in fading light. A quiet place but not peaceful. "I didn't know those men," Lila finally said, her words cautious, like she needed to explain something. "I didn't speak to them. I wasn't involved in anything. I was just leaving town. I don't even know why." "You don't have to explain," Cassian said. She went silent again. He could feel the tension in her grip. She didn't quite believe she was safe yet, not emotionally. Survival sometimes arrived long before the mind could accept it. By the time they reached a small ridge of scattered cedar trees, night was close. Cassian stopped the horse and dismounted. The desert cool settled fast, the heat of the day fading. "We'll camp here," he said. "Town's still a few hours. Better we rest. You need time to breathe." Lila just sat there on the horse for a moment, staring forward like her body had stopped responding to her. When she finally moved, she lowered herself carefully to the ground. Her legs were unsteady. Cassian reached out to steady her, but she stopped him with a small shake of her head. "I'm all right," she said. But her voice sounded like she didn't quite believe it. Cassian gathered dry brushwood and started a small fire. Lila sat near it, pulling her knees close. The light made her face look sharp and tired. She watched the flames without blinking much. Cassian didn't speak right away. He gave her space because she looked like she needed control over at least one thing. Silence. After a while she asked, "Do you know death well?" Cassian lifted his gaze to her. The fire crackled softly between them. "Yes," he answered. She nodded a little. "I've never seen someone die before. Not that close." Her voice caught for a moment, but she didn't break. "I thought I would scream. But I just froze." "That happens," Cassian said. "It's not weakness. It's shock." She stared into the fire again. "I keep thinking, they could have taken me anywhere. I don't know what they wanted. I didn't know what to do." Cassian thought about the way she had looked back at the canyon. Hyper alert. Tracking every sound. "You stayed aware," he said. "You didn't shut down. That's why you're still alive." Lila's jaw flexed. She took a slow breath. "What about you?" she asked softly. "Why did you follow them?" "You don't know me." Cassian didn't answer right away. His past sat heavy in the space between breaths. The firelight flickered across his hands, revealing the old scars the way daylight hid them. He looked at her directly. "A long time ago someone needed help and I didn't get there fast enough," he said. "I don't repeat mistakes." Lila looked at him then, not scared, not overwhelmed, just seeing him clearly for the first time. She nodded once, slow. They sat like that for a while, no dramatic confessions, no sudden comfort. Just two people trying to settle the weight in their chests. Eventually, Cassian stood and walked a bit away from the fire. He scanned the ridges, the open land, the horizon. His posture changed, alert, guarded. Lila noticed. "Something wrong?" Cassian kept watching the dark. "No," he said. But his tone wasn't relaxed. "Just being sure." He didn't tell her what he was thinking. Those men didn't look like drifters. They looked like men who worked for someone. Someone who might come looking. He returned to the fire and sat down again. They didn't speak after that. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was just the only thing they had energy for. The night deepened. The fire burned low. And the desert, vast and silent, waited for morning. The desert morning didn't come softly. The sun rose fast, sharp and bright, painting the sky in a hard gold that washed across the sand and rock. Cassian was already awake when Lila opened her eyes. He stood a short distance away, facing east, his hat pulled low and one hand resting near the gun at his hip. The kind of posture that never fully relaxed. Lila sat up slowly. Her muscles ached from sleeping on the ground, and her throat felt dry again. She watched Cassian's back and the way he scanned the horizon, constant, measured, focused. He hadn't slept much, maybe at all. The fire had burned down to ash. The wind moved softly across the open plain. "Did you hear something?" Lila asked. Cassian shook his head once, still watching the distance. Just making sure we're alone. He didn't sound fearful. Just calculated. Lila pulled her shawl tighter, though the air was already warming. She tried to shake off the tension from the night before. It clung to her tight behind her ribs. She stood and walked to where he stood. He didn't turn but acknowledged her presence with the slightest shift of his stance. "Cassian," she said quietly. She hesitated, then asked, "This wasn't random, was it?" "The men who took me." Cassian finally looked at her. His expression didn't change, but the silence before he answered told her enough. "No," he said. Lila let the air out slowly. Her chest tightened. "Who?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "But they were organized. They weren't acting on chance." She swallowed hard. There was a sting behind her eyes, but she pushed it down. She didn't want to fall apart again, not after she had made it through the worst of it. Cassian stepped closer, just enough that she felt the presence of him more than the heat of the sun. "You're not going back to town alone?" he said. Lila held his gaze. "You think they'll come for me again?" He didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. He placed his hands on the saddle, preparing the horse. Lila could tell by the way he worked, fast, practiced, that he didn't intend to waste a moment. They rode out soon after, heading toward town. The land stretched wide ahead of them, dust, sagebrush, and the wooden outline of the distant settlement just beginning to show on the horizon. Lila held onto the saddle this time without hesitation, her posture steadier. As they rode, they passed a small creek. Cassian slowed the horse to let it drink. Lila dismounted and walked to the edge of the water. She knelt, cupped her hands, and let the cold run across her palms before drinking. The shock of it helped clear her mind. Cassian watched her, not in a way that intruded, but with an awareness that made her feel seen. Protected, even if she didn't want to rely on that feeling too much. Lila's breathing steadied. She looked up at him. "You said someone once needed help and you were too late." Her voice was quiet, not demanding. "Who was it?" Cassian didn't look away this time. He held her eyes directly. "My brother," he said. The simple honesty of it made the air feel heavy. Lila didn't ask anything more. She saw enough in his expression, the controlled grief, the discipline holding something broken in place. She stood and wiped her hands on her skirt. The fabric was dusty, worn from travel, but it fit her well. Cassian noticed that when she adjusted her shawl, her movements were slow and careful, still recovering but stronger than the night before. They mounted again and continued toward town. As they got closer, the noise of daily life took shape. Wagon wheels, horses, voices, distant hammering. Normal sounds. But something shifted when they arrived. People stared. Not subtle looks, open, sharp, curious, suspicious. Cassian didn't change his pace, but the tension in his posture told Lila he noticed every gaze. They rode straight to the stable. Cassian dismounted first and helped Lila down. His hand held her waist a second longer than necessary, not in a way that crossed a line, but steadying her, grounding her. Lila felt the warmth of his hand even after he let go. Inside the stable, the owner paused, eyes flicking between them. "You brought company," he said cautiously. Cassian looked at him evenly. "I did." The stable owner didn't ask questions. He just nodded and took the horse. When they stepped back out into the street, Lila noticed a figure watching them from across the way, a man in a long coat, arms resting loosely at his sides. Not one of the men from the canyon. Different. But the kind of different that set Cassian on alert instantly. Cassian's hand settled near his gun. "Lila," he said quietly without turning his head, "stay close to me." She did. Her heart lifted into her throat, but she didn't freeze this time. She stood beside him, ready for whatever was coming. The man took one slow step forward. The air between all three of them tightened. The street noise quieted. And for the first time since the canyon, Lila realized something. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The street stayed quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. People nearby pretended to keep working or talking, but their eyes kept shifting toward Cassian, Lila, and the stranger. The dust on the road drifted lightly around their boots, and the heat of the day settled heavy over everything. Cassian didn't move first. He didn't speak. His shoulders were squared, weight balanced, his hand relaxed but close to his gun. He watched the stranger carefully, measuring distance, stance, and intent. The man was in his late 30s, maybe older. He had a gray coat that looked like it had lived through worse years than he had. His beard was short, his face drawn and tired. His gun belt hung low on his hip, well used. He wasn't here by chance. Lila's breath shortened, but she controlled it. She kept one step behind Cassian, just to his right, where she wouldn't block his draw. Her hands were still and her eyes sharp. She remembered how it felt to be helpless in the canyon. She would not feel that way again. The stranger finally spoke. "Cassian Blackwell," he said, not loud, just certain. Cassian's jaw tightened slightly. "You know my name. That means you need something." The man nodded once, his gaze steady. "Name's Hale Maddox. I used to ride with your brother." Cassian didn't blink, but Lila saw something change in his expression. A stillness. The kind that came before pain. Hale continued. "Word was you died at Cold Creek. Guess that wasn't true." Cassian didn't look away. "Not all of us died." Hale shifted his weight, his hand never going near his gun. "No. Not all. But enough." Lila watched Cassian's face. The hardness there wasn't anger, it was old loss, deep and familiar. Hale looked over at Lila then, and something about the way he did it made Cassian step slightly in front of her. Not obvious, just enough to change the space. "Not here to cause trouble," Hale said. "I'm not hunting you. I'm here because someone else is. A group. They're moving through towns. Looking for the girl." Lila felt her stomach tighten. "Why?" Her voice was steady, but her pulse wasn't. Hale looked at her with something like regret. "Your father. He made enemies. Big ones. They want leverage. They think you're it." Lila froze. Her mouth felt dry again. She knew her father's history wasn't clean, but she assumed whatever shadows followed him had faded by now. She was wrong. Cassian didn't look at her, but she could feel the shift in him, an immediate decision forming. Hale continued, "They'll be here by sundown. Not just riders. Men who don't stop when they're shot. Men paid to finish the job." Cassian nodded once, slow. "Then we don't give them ground to walk on." Hale let out a tired breath. "I figured you'd say that. I can help. But if we're staying ahead of them, we move fast." Cassian's voice had no hesitation. "We're not running." Lila looked at him. "Then what are we doing?" Cassian finally looked at her, direct, firm. She saw no fear in his eyes. Only control. Thought. Strategy. "We end it," he said. It wasn't bravado. It was simply the only path left. Hale nodded. "There's an old barn north of here. Abandoned. Good cover. If you want to pick your fight, that's where to do it." Cassian turned slightly toward Lila. The movement was small, but it changed the entire atmosphere. His voice was quieter now, pitched only for her. "You don't have to be there. I can send you on the train east. You'd be safe." Lila felt the offer like something heavy placed in her hands. Safety. Escape. A chance to disappear. But her mind went back to the canyon, the rope, the struggling breath, the men's hands, then to Cassian leading her through the desert, never once letting her fall behind. She stood straighter. "I'm not leaving you," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to sound brave. She simply told the truth. Cassian's eyes held hers, and for a moment, the street around them didn't exist. Something unspoken passed between them, quiet and certain. Cassian nodded once, slow. "All right," he said. He stepped closer to her, not touching but close enough that she felt the heat of him, the steadiness, the unshakable presence that made fear loosen its grip. Hale looked away, giving them space without being told. Cassian glanced back toward him. "Get your horse. We ride in 10 minutes." Hale turned and walked toward the stable. Cassian and Lila remained facing each other. She exhaled, her chest tight but her voice steady. "We're really doing this." Cassian's voice was low. "We are." Lila swallowed. Her palms were damp, but her eyes stayed locked to his. "I'm not afraid of being with you," she said. "I'm afraid of losing you." Cassian didn't answer right away. His jaw flexed, and he looked away just for a second before meeting her eyes again. "You won't," he said. Not a promise made lightly. A vow built from everything they had survived so far. They turned and walked toward the stable together. Side by side. The fight was no longer something coming to them. They were going to meet it. The abandoned barn sat alone at the edge of a dried-out field. The boards were faded gray from years of sun, and the roof sagged in the middle. There was no movement around it, no birds, no cattle, no human trace. Just quiet land and heat rising in waves off the ground. The kind of place people forgot existed. Cassian, Lila, and Hale rode in slow, keeping distance between the horses so they could hear anything unusual. Cassian's eyes scanned every direction. He wasn't nervous. He was calculating, making sure nothing slipped past him. Hale rode with his shoulders slightly hunched, like he carried the weight of something unfinished. Lila rode steady but quiet, holding tension deep in her chest. She thought about the men who had taken her. Their hands. Their voices. The rope around her wrists. She felt her breathing shorten for a moment, but she forced her lungs to open. She couldn't let that memory make her small. Not now. They reached the barn. Cassian dismounted first. He checked the door, then stepped inside. The air smelled like old hay and dust. Sunlight leaked through cracks in long narrow beams, striping the floor. It was empty except for a broken ladder and a few rusted tools. Cassian walked the interior with slow, steady steps. He pictured angles, cover, elevation, lines of sight. He didn't speak while he worked, he didn't need to. Every placement, every detail was deliberate. Hale stood by the entrance, his arms crossed, watching Cassian move. "He's still the same," Hale muttered under his breath. Lila heard him. "Same how?" Hale didn't look at her. When something needs to be done, his mind shuts everything else out. Grief, fear, doubt. He just works. Lila watched Cassian place crates near a window, creating a protected firing position. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. She could almost see the memory of war on him, shaping his decisions now. Cassian stopped, turned toward Lila. "We'll stay here. They'll approach from the south ridge. That's the only direction that gives them cover. They'll think we're hiding. They'll try to corner us." His voice was calm. The plan was simple. Contain the threat. And it? Lila nodded. She didn't ask if he was sure. She trusted him that deeply, even though trusting anyone had once felt impossible. She walked closer to him. "Tell me where you want me." Cassian looked at her for a long moment. Not as someone fragile, not someone he had to push away for safety. Someone who chose to stand beside him. "There," he said, pointing to the loft ladder. "You'll have a high view. Stay low. Don't fire unless you have to." Lila nodded. Her heartbeat was strong but not erratic. She could do this. Hale took his place near the side window. He checked the edge of his revolver with the familiarity of someone who had known violence for too long. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher. The air grew still. Lila sat in the loft, watching Cassian below. His shoulders were broad, steady. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see the line of his jaw, the firmness there. She felt a pull toward him, stronger now because of everything they had endured together. Not just attraction. Reliance. Recognition. Something deeper. Cassian looked up at her once. Not long. Just a second. Enough. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with something she couldn't name fully. Then they heard it. Distant hoofbeats. Slow. Controlled. Not rushed. They were coming as if they believed no one could stop them. Cassian's eyes sharpened. Hale lifted his revolver and exhaled, letting his shoulders relax. Lila steadied her grip on the rifle she'd brought up with her. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then they stopped outside the barn. Silence. Cassian didn't move. A voice outside called, loud and taunting, "Blackwell. We know you're in there. Hand over the girl and we'll let you ride out alive." Lila's heart punched once hard, but Cassian didn't flinch. He stepped forward, voice steady, strong, and without a trace of fear. "You want her?" he said. "Come take her." There was a beat of dead stillness. Then the first gunshot cracked. Wood splintered beside the window where Hale stood. Hale answered with one clean shot in return. Everything erupted at once. More gunfire. Boots hitting dirt. Voices shouting commands. The barn walls shook with each impact. The air filled with dust and powder smoke. Cassian moved like someone who had lived in this chaos before, quick, precise, never wasting a motion. When he fired, he didn't miss. When he shifted position, he already knew where the next threat would be. Lila kept low in the loft, watching angles the others couldn't see. She saw a man creeping around the right side, trying to get close to the door. Her hands trembled just once, but she steadied them. She aimed. She exhaled. She fired. The man dropped. Her shoulders shook, not from regret, but from the shock of crossing a line she never thought she would have to cross. She pressed her forehead against her arm for a moment, grounding herself. She didn't have time to collapse. She didn't have time to think about what it meant. She looked down toward Cassian. He wasn't looking at the enemy. He was looking at her. His expression was not shock. Not disapproval. Just solid, steady acknowledgement. "You did what you had to." Lila held his gaze. The fight outside slowed. The attackers realized they were losing ground. Cassian moved to the doorway. Hale covered him. Lila scanned the open field for movement. The final riders pulled back, retreating. Their leaders shouted for withdrawal. Hoofbeats thundered away across dry earth. Silence returned, slow and heavy. Hale lowered his gun. His breathing was rough. Sweat streaked down his face. Lila stayed in the loft for a moment, her hand gripping the wood rail. Cassian stepped into the open space below her and looked up. "Come down," he said. His voice wasn't commanding. It was quiet, steady, human. Lila climbed down the ladder carefully. When she reached the ground, Cassian stepped close to her, close enough that she could see the dust on his jaw, the sweat on his neck, the tension in his shoulders finally beginning to release. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Cassian lifted his hand and rested it lightly at her waist. Just enough to anchor her. Lila let out a shaky breath. She felt the warmth of his touch move through her, calming the trembling inside her chest. "I didn't freeze," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Cassian shook his head. His eyes held hers. "No, you didn't." Their breath mingled. His hand stayed at her waist, steady and sure. The closeness wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was inevitable. She leaned in slightly. Cassian didn't pull her in. He just didn't pull away. Their foreheads touched just for a moment, not a kiss. Something quieter. More real. A choice. A promise in the middle of gun smoke and dust. "We are in this together." Outside, the wind moved across the field again. But inside, neither of them moved away. The next morning was crisp, colder than expected for late summer in Arizona territory. The desert air carried the scent of dried sage and dust stirred from the night wind. Cassian, Hale, and Lila had moved the horses to a small arroyo behind the barn. The fight from the day before had left tracks across the plain. Hoofprints, broken sagebrush, splintered wood, and Cassian studied every mark carefully, reading the movement of their attackers like a map. Lila sat on a rock nearby, brushing dust from her skirt. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear this time but from exhaustion, the adrenaline of the previous day's fight finally catching up. Her eyes followed Cassian's every movement, noting how his boots scuffed lightly against the sand, the slight tilt of his head when he checked the ridge, the way his fingers flexed near his gun belt even when he wasn't touching it. She hadn't realized before how much comfort she drew from the steadiness of his presence. "You think they'll come back?" she asked quietly. Her voice was low, almost swallowed by the wind. Cassian didn't answer immediately. He knelt to examine a hoofprint, turning it over with a careful eye. He didn't need to see the trail to know the answer. The men would regroup, but it wouldn't matter as long as they stayed ahead. Still, he respected her right to ask. "Maybe," he said finally. "But if they do, we'll be ready." His tone was calm, not meant to reassure, just factual. Lila nodded. She pulled her knees closer, feeling the ache in her muscles from riding and crouching the day before. I don't know how you do this. Face people like that every day." Cassian glanced at her. His eyes softened briefly, though his posture didn't change. "You learn to focus. Fear's useful if it keeps you alive, but it can't run your choices." Lila considered that, then hesitated before speaking again. "Do you ever think you'll stop? I mean, all this running, fighting, dying?" Her words were cautious, almost testing him. Cassian exhaled slowly, turning his gaze to the horizon. "Not until it's done. Until there's nothing left chasing me." His jaw tightened, a small muscle flexing at the corner of his mouth. He didn't need to explain, she understood the weight behind it. They mounted again mid-morning. The barn behind them was quiet, abandoned, and they kept to the shadows as they rode east toward Sable Creek, ready to prepare for the final confrontation. Lila rode behind Cassian, her hands lightly resting on his waist. She noticed how he adjusted his grip on the reins without a word, his body moving smoothly over the horse, controlled and deliberate. As they approached the outskirts of town, a thin line of dust appeared in the distance. Cassian slowed the horse, crouching low in the saddle to study it. Two riders moving cautiously, scanning the ground. Bandits coming to finish what had started. Cassian felt the familiar pulse of adrenaline, but it was different now. He wasn't chasing. He was protecting. And she was beside him. "Stay close," he whispered to Lila. She pressed herself slightly into him, not out of fear but instinct. Her heart pounded, and she realized just how much she had relied on him these past days. They moved into the alley behind the general store, using the cover of crates and barrels. Cassian assessed every angle, the street, the doors, the windows, mapping escape routes, lines of fire, and positions for defense. He signaled to Hale with a small nod, who moved to a vantage point near the roofline, his revolver already leveled toward the approaching riders. The bandits paused at the edge of the street. Their leader dismounted, squinting through the sun. Cassian stepped slightly into view, showing just enough to draw their attention but not enough to make himself vulnerable. "Blackwell," the leader barked. "We're giving you one last chance. Hand over the girl and maybe you ride out." Cassian's eyes didn't flinch. "She's not going anywhere." The leader cursed and signaled. Two men began moving around the side of the store. Cassian shot quickly, dropping one before he even realized he'd aimed. Lila flinched at the sound but remained steady. Her hands itched to help and Cassian knew she wanted to. He gave a small tilt of his head toward the corner, signaling her to stay low. The bandits fired back, bullets pinging off barrels, the wooden walls, the ground. Dust and grit filled the alley. Cassian moved in precise steps, firing only when he needed to, protecting both Lila and Hale. His mind raced, not with fear but with calculation. Every move, every breath, every shot had a purpose. Lila kept low, her pulse racing. She thought about the rope around her wrists, the canyon, the fear, and the trust she had come to place in Cassian. She realized now that she had learned how to act under pressure because of him. Her hands no longer shook, they gripped the small revolver Hale had lent her. She peeked from behind the crate and fired once, narrowly missing the second man. He ducked behind cover. Cassian moved closer to her position, scanning the line of sight. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of danger, trust, and connection. No words were necessary. The battle continued for a few tense minutes. Each shot was measured, each movement deliberate. Lila's stomach ached with tension, but the tightness was no longer panic. She could act. She could contribute. She could survive. Finally, the bandits realized they were losing ground. The leader cursed loudly and waved the others back. Hoofbeats faded as the men retreated across the street, disappearing into the heat-hazed distance. Cassian didn't immediately relax. He lowered his gun slowly, scanning for any signs of return. Hale exhaled, his shoulders sagging. Lila climbed out from behind the crate, brushing dust from her skirt. She took a shaky breath, feeling the adrenaline ebb. Cassian stepped toward her, his presence steady and grounding. "You did well," he said quietly. Her eyes flicked to him, not looking for praise but acknowledgement. "I didn't freeze," she said. Cassian's jaw flexed and he didn't smile, but his hand brushed briefly against hers, light, almost imperceptible. Enough. The street was quiet again. The air smelled of dust and spent gunpowder. They both knew this wasn't over. But for the first time, Lila felt something stronger than fear. A sharp, undeniable confidence that together they could face what came next. Cassian didn't speak immediately. He just stepped closer, and the small distance between them felt charged with everything unsaid. The danger, the trust, the quiet reliance, and the closeness they had built over days of survival. And Lila realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing beside someone she trusted completely. Someone who had proven that no matter what came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The sun hung low over Sable Creek, painting the wooden facades in harsh gold and stretching long shadows across the streets. Cassian led Lila and Hale along the edge of town, keeping them close to walls and doorways. The town was alive with ordinary activity, wagons rolling, doors slamming, the occasional shout, but beneath it all, the tension was palpable. Everyone seemed to know something was about to happen, though no one could say what. Lila walked beside Cassian, hand brushing against his arm once, lightly, almost instinctively. Her pulse was quick, not from fear this time, but anticipation. Every muscle in her body was ready. She trusted him entirely, and that trust brought a strange calm. Cassian scanned the street ahead, noting every alley, window, and rooftop. His mind mapped every possible threat. He knew the bandits from the canyon had sent reinforcements, and they would likely strike here. But he also knew the town itself could be used to their advantage. He didn't speak yet. His silence was a shield and a focus. They reached the small general store near the center of town. Cassian motioned to Lila and Hale to take positions. Lila moved quickly, setting herself near the back door where she could see the street without being fully exposed. Hale positioned himself on the second-story roof of a nearby building, giving them a high vantage point. Cassian took the center, standing where he could act as both anchor and shield. The first signs of movement came as shadows shifted across the street. 3 riders emerged from the east, cautious, scanning, trying to gauge how many were prepared. Cassian noted their approach but did not panic. His hand rested lightly on the gun at his hip, fingers flexing, ready. Lila tensed beside him. "They've got numbers," she whispered. Cassian's gaze didn't leave the riders. "Not enough," he said simply. The riders halted, calling out with taunts and threats. "Blackwell, come out. That girl's worth more than your life." Cassian's jaw tightened. He didn't move immediately. He let the riders expose themselves, calculating. Every second revealed a weakness, every motion offered a chance. Lila's hand tightened on the rifle. Then it happened. The first rider drew a weapon and fired. The bullet hit the wooden post inches from Cassian's head. He didn't flinch. He fired in return, precise, hitting the rider in the shoulder. The second rider ducked, scrambling for cover. Hale took a clean shot from above, taking out the third rider's horse, forcing the man to hit the dirt. Lila's breathing was sharp but controlled. She watched the exchange, noting each movement, feeling the tension in every fiber of her being. She realized she had learned more than survival. She had learned awareness, timing, and trust. She was part of this now. The fight intensified as more riders appeared. Cassian moved fluidly, not wasting energy, not panicking, keeping the others covered while analyzing every angle. Bullets ricocheted off walls and barrels. Dust and gunpowder filled the air. Lila's hands shook once when a stray shot kicked up debris at her feet, but she steadied herself, keeping her focus sharp. At one point, a man came around the side of the general store. Lila's shot took him down before he could reach the corner. Cassian didn't look at her, but she felt his awareness of her action. A small nod. Silent acknowledgement. They were moving in unison, connected without words. The remaining riders realized they were outmatched. Two of them bolted, leaving their leader behind. He approached carefully, weapon drawn, eyes calculating. Cassian stepped slightly forward, keeping Lila behind him, his voice low but firm. "This ends now," Cassian said. The leader hesitated, weighing options. Then, seeing no opportunity, he threw his gun down and raised his hands. Cassian moved quickly to disarm him and tie him to a post, ensuring he could cause no more harm. Hale secured the surrounding area, scanning for anyone else. Lila let out a long breath. Her knees felt weak, but her hands were steady. She realized the danger was over. The fight that had hung over them for days was finally done. Cassian turned to her, his eyes scanning her face, taking in the tension, the relief, the quiet strength that had grown over the past days. "You're safe," he said. She nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion, relief, and something deeper. "We made it." Cassian stepped closer, brushing dust from his coat. He reached for her hand. Not abruptly, not demanding, but steady, grounding. She placed hers in his. The warmth, the firmness, the certainty, it carried more meaning than words could ever hold. The townspeople began to emerge from doorways, watching from a distance. Some offered murmured congratulations, some stayed silent. Cassian didn't pay attention to them. His focus was on Lila. She looked up at him. "What now?" He tilted his head, a faint shadow of a smile appearing. "Now we live. Together." Lila felt a surge of relief, hope, and certainty she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She leaned slightly into him. He didn't move away. The hand at her waist remained gentle but firm. For the first time in weeks, the desert didn't feel endless or threatening. The town didn't feel like a trap. And the past, with all its danger and pain, didn't dominate the present. They walked through the quiet street side by side, Cassian's hand brushing hers occasionally, small gestures that spoke more than words. Hale followed a few steps behind, silently acknowledging their bond without intrusion. When they reached the outskirts, Cassian paused. He looked at her with a steady gaze, one that had never wavered through danger, exhaustion, or fear. "You're with me," he said. Lila nodded. "Always." They mounted their horses together. The sun was low, dipping behind the mesas. Dust rose gently from the hooves, but it no longer carried tension, only the rhythm of movement, of freedom and choice. As they rode out of town, side by side, Cassian glanced at Lila briefly. She met his gaze. No words. No hesitation. Just understanding. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt the future was theirs to shape, free from the shadows, free from fear, and entirely together. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, leaving a sky painted in soft, fading light. The desert stretched ahead, vast and open, but no longer a threat. They were ready to face it, hand in hand, with nothing left unspoken and everything finally resolved. The fight was over. The danger had passed. And the life they wanted, together, was waiting.